Welcome to Careers in Discovery, where you'll meet scientists who've forged outstanding careers in biotech and hear about what they've learned along the way. This podcast is brought to you by Singular, building brilliant biotechs. Samantha Dale Strasser is the Chief Scientific Officer of Pepper Bio, the world's first transomic analysis company. Samantha joined us in a fascinating discussion about her career to date and her experiences of building Pepper, developing cures with confidence, and the differences between working in academic research and in a startup biotech. This week on Careers in Discovery, I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Samantha Dale Strasser of Pepper Bio. Samantha, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. We always start by talking about what you're up to now. And I'm really intrigued to find out more about Pepper Bio, about the quest that you're on to develop cures with confidence and how it's all going so far. So tell us a bit about what you're up to and the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. So Pepper Bio, as you said, we're developing cures with confidence. We're the world's first transomic analysis company, which means we often liken this to the Google Maps for drug discovery. So we bring more data and information to understand functional context within biology to make an informed decision on what happens in disease or what happens when a drug is used to treat a disease.
Yes.
And so this kind of those two sides of the coin is actually supporting a lot of what we're going on right now for partnerships. So we're working with 4 different pharma companies on their programs and their own questions in drug discovery, and also our own drug pipeline. So we're applying that to a lot of different technical questions within drug discovery to end the untreatable.
Yes, interesting. And so for the uninitiated, could you tell us a bit about transomic analysis and kind of the advantages it gives you and those sorts of things?
Of course. So transomics itself is an analysis that includes a lot of different large-scale data sets within biology. Many folks are familiar with genomics, which is essentially an instruction set to what can happen in biological signaling. But we also bring in additional information. So transcriptomics, proteomics, so proteins themselves, and information on modified proteins, specifically post-translational modifications. Big word for essentially molecular switches that are added to proteins to change their function and changes what they can do, turns different things on or off. And what's fantastic about Pepper's technology is we first off bring that functional context to that switch information. So we have information on activity of really what proteins are doing in a system of study.
Okay.
Second facet is we actually bring global information. We look at all of these data layers on a large scale. So we have thousands to tens of thousands of different analytes that we're looking at. And then lastly, we actually integrate across these 3 data layers to drive towards a more causal perspective that's contrasting to a more traditional correlative approach, which gives us the advantage of really understanding what's happening on a biological level that's closest modeling biology as it happens. So
yeah, I see. Okay, so you're maybe closing the inference gap a little bit in
absolutely.
Yeah, makes
well
sense.
Said.
And I suppose these are all big data sets, as you touched on, and complex data sets. And I suppose this is something that has been made possible over the last few years, right? 10 years ago, it would have been very difficult to do this sort of analysis. But, tell us a bit about how you arrived at this idea, and we'll talk a bit about the founding of the company and things as well. But give us the potted history to start with.
Yeah. So just a bit on the technological landscape. You're absolutely correct that 10 years ago, this would not have been tractable. I mean, frankly speaking, we sequenced the human genome just over 20 years ago. So that in and of itself is very nascent. And the additional data layers, the transcriptomics, proteomics, and phosphoproteomics that I mentioned, are also fairly new in our ability as a field to collect quality large-scale data sets of that type. And so part of what unlocked Pepper is being able to really move forward and run with our interpretive technology is the data that exists that we can now study and measure. Notably, advances in proteomics and phosphoproteomics, a field known as mass spectrometry, is how the data is collected. And it's been a phenomenal time of, before Pepper came, the data was there. There were a lot of questions of what do we do with it. And now what we're bringing is answers to that question, being able to comprehensively interpret this data in a meaningful way to drive decision making and drug discovery.
Yes, and hence with more confidence and
Absolutely.
greater insight, right? And I would guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would guess that having this level of insight also not just allows you to have more confidence in the decisions, but perhaps allows you to draw conclusions that you just wouldn't have been able to see previously.
Absolutely. So there is certainly an aspect, and actually, especially looking at global information as well, of seeing insights that previously would have been missed 100%. There's work that we've done that identified a new target in inflammatory bowel disease that without the types of technologies that Pepper is now growing and expanding upon just would have been missed. And so that was one key insight that was really really exciting early on to see and really drive forward the momentum of building and growing Pepper to where it is today.
Yes. And no, interesting. And so in this type of company then, and we're seeing more companies, I suppose, whether it's therapeutic companies or platform companies or combinations of the two, as you mentioned earlier. I suppose it's becoming more common, but it's a different type of business than the traditional wet lab biology company that stands alone. Although, however much they stood alone previously is up for debate, I suppose. But you take my point. In this sort of organization, and in Pepper uniquely, I suppose, as the Chief Scientific Officer there, Samantha, tell us a bit about your role, your focus, where you spend your time, what your part of the program is.
Yeah. So for my role in the program itself, so I'm the technical founder as a Chief Science Officer. And I, in that, started out actually as developing the foundation to our technology. So during my graduate work at MIT, had developed some of the early work and applications during my graduate studies. And that foundation is what's led to building and expanding upon that early work to Pepper's technology that's proprietary for us today. And for me in my time, I have a mix of computational work, growing a computational team as well. So having folks that are now expanding upon the technology and its interpretation, benchmarking, the like. That's also balanced then with the scientific side of building out applications. So our own internal drug pipeline, working with a team to in oncology, we're actually building out our own pipeline and are currently amidst target discovery and validation activities there. And applying it to partnered projects. So I've loved the role as I've seen the transition of the early technology to now applying it to key questions and working with a phenomenal group of people to expand that, to run with that. And it's been, as a scientist, a dream in many ways of mine. So it's been fantastic.
And it stayed pretty varied from the sounds of it. And there's lots of things that you get involved in.
Yes, it's been, honestly, that's kept things fun in a lot of ways. I've learned a lot from fantastic mentors and people. The community here in Boston as well has just been a great space to learn from folks. As there is quite a varied aspect to the job, and needing great mentors and people to support that is also phenomenal. So
no, of course. I'm interested as well. I know we've touched on this previously, but most biotech companies make up words for their names, but they all end up sounding roughly the same. I mean, there's a few different phenotypes of it.
Yeah.
Tell me why Pepper?
Well, who wouldn't want to add some pepper to their pipeline?
Excellent.
But no, in all seriousness, though, we picked the name as we wanted something that showed our enthusiasm and energy for, and in many ways, determinism for treating the untreatable, for ending the untreatable. And pepper was a word that embodied that to us. It was, continually repeated, going after something and with gusto and with vigor. And that's here at Pepper how we approach everything that we do, and to reach our goal at the end of the day of helping patients. Plus it's a easy to remember word. It's happy, it's friendly, and we've liked that. So
no, that's true. You touched on it there as well. There are clearly broad applications for this type of technology, and I would guess it's pretty fundamentally it's pretty disease agnostic, in terms of what you could apply it to. but I believe there are some areas you're focusing on. You talked about oncology in your own pipeline
Mhm.
and inflammatory bowel disease. Where are you concentrating for now?
Yeah. So our own internal pipeline, as you highlighted, yes, is within oncology. Um, Driven, first and foremost by the scientific impact that can be had there with our
Hmm.
technology and platform to identify insights in an area where there are not treatments for many patients, or not very strong treatments for other patients as well. Resistance is obviously a big challenge in the space, as well. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of facets that we can bring new value to within oncology. You are correct, though, that it is a disease agnostic platform, at its core. So we are in the partnerships that we work on and looking to other disease areas as well.
Okay.
And I've already completed a partnership in the CNS space, and have early work, as you flagged, in inflammatory as well.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And I'm sure lots of big plans for where you could take it in the future.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, big picture, we see the first three key areas being those that I've highlighted. So of
Hmm.
oncology, inflammatory, and neurodegenerative. Um, but it's something that we're excited to expand into to multiple diseases within those. So
Yes. Yeah, there's certainly plenty of ground to cover in those three
yes,
areas.
without a doubt. Yes.
So clearly from what you've said already, Samantha, the story of Pepper, at least from a technology point of view, sorry, is pretty intertwined with your career to date and your research
Yes.
as you were developing your studies. So tell me a little bit about. Well, let's go back to the beginning first of all. I know you originally started out training as a biomedical engineer. So tell us a bit about why science and engineering in general, why that particular area, and then talk us through how it developed from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess big picture, I have always been really excited about finally just the sheer data that we now have
Hmm.
access to in biology, coupled with the computational power to now do something with that and tease out new actionable insights from that data.
Yes.
And so for me, as you flagged, that started as studying biomedical engineering. I'd also coupled that with applied mathematics. This was during my bachelor's degree at Northwestern University, so
Hmm.
just outside Chicago. Um, which coincidentally was also where I first got to know my now co-founder, John.
Okay.
He was also biomedical engineering with me. He paired that with economics, so we were a bit contrasting in some of our interests there, but aligned overall on the impact that we wanted to make. And so that was kind of the early alignment on knowing we wanted to work together in the future to
Hmm.
build a company and to solve critical problems in healthcare. Had no idea what that meant 10 plus years ago. But did know, we wanted to keep in touch as our careers evolved.
Yes.
So for me, then following that time at Northwestern, I went to build out my background further on the technical side. So I had worked um, in a research lab, earning my master's at the University of Cambridge in the
Hmm.
UK through the Churchill Scholarship, and then came back to the US for my PhD. And so that was early on in my PhD, was really a critical point for me in my career, and really the foundation to Pepper, as that's where, through really two facets, that what we're building today really started to come into focus. So the
Yes.
first facet was really, for at least on a very personal level, honing in on the impact that we wanted to make, and that I, as a scientist, wanted to make. So I learned very, very early on in graduate school that my father had frontal temporal dementia.
Okay.
I had never heard of that disease before the doctor's appointment, but very, very quickly learned the realities that, like, individuals with Alzheimer's and other dementias and neurodegenerative diseases, the stark realities that they face of no options. I think
Mm.
before that, I had this slightly rosier view of, well, we're really advanced technologically. We have all these new things that are coming through from industry, from academia. There must be something,
Hmm.
and was a very harsh reality. The answer was no in that case. And being sent home and realizing in many ways the industry had failed my father and our family at that time to date, that I saw that as, where I wanted to make an impact on the line, was to change someone else's future, to not have that experience for them and their family.
I see.
And so really kind of honed my focus in many ways of where I wanted to apply the science and technical questions that I went after. I'd always loved the puzzle of it, the mathematics, the curiosity of it, but that really shaped where I wanted the insights that I focused on to go at the end of the day, which was to a patient. And so as we've built Pepper and the research that I did even myself following there, that really has been the common thread of the end of the day. That's why we're building the company and why we're here, is to help patients. And so that lens is what really then honed and focused my graduate work at MIT.
Yes.
So I was working with Doug Laufenberger in biological engineering while earning my degree in electrical engineering and computer science, coupled with being mentored by faculty at Harvard Medical School, Kevin Haggis, and had been really, focusing in on the time of what are a lot of the questions for how we approach answering and solving complex disease today, and where are we missing information? What are the gaps that we have? And that led me to really focusing on information that was downstream of genomics. So looking not at the instruction set, but let's look on the whole other end of the spectrum of proteins and modified proteins. And spent my PhD looking at how to more comprehensively interpret that information, as there had historically been limitations around just how to actionably make sense of the large data sets that we had access to. And through that was able to develop a technology and apply it to early work within inflammatory bowel disease, as well as oncology, mutant KRAS cancers.
Yes.
And through that, finding new insights that historically would not have been seen through this functional data was really the green light towards pushing forward and building Pepper, that then became the world's first transomics company. So bringing in not just proteomics and phospho, but then expanding that to additional data layers and really expanding our ability to see new insights. So.
Yes, I see. So that patient focus has been there from the very beginning, from the sounds of it. And are there things that you then do to keep that at the heart of the company? Have there been things that you've sort of built into the fabric of the company that have allowed you to retain that?
Yes. So a lot of it stems from how we think about when there's questions or decisions that we make as a team, focusing on, will this drive forward that goal of reaching a patient? And if we have options of different paths or facets to focus on, right, we're always constrained by time and money. So how do we, if those constraints come to play and we have a choice to make, we'll pick the path that drives closer towards that treatment insight. And sometimes that can be a realm of, if we're conducting an experiment, what's the optimal experiment that we want to design that will answer that patient question? We want to publish as well, and that's something that we, for our team, are excited to support and prioritize. But first and foremost, our goal is that driving forward for treatment insights. So.
Yes. Yeah, I see. So that remains at the heart of decision making.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And we've kind of touched on this already, but you started your PhD around 2012, 2013, that sort of time?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. And of course, genomics was a growing field at the time, or but not where it is today, as we mentioned. And even bioinformatics as a discipline was fairly new, right? It was
quite
there weren't
true.
many bioinformaticians around. So, tell us a bit about, I guess, in the research that you were doing, some of the challenges that created, or some of the things you remember about starting out on this journey to understand what was happening in the protein and what was happening in downstream from the genomic instruction set, as you said.
So a lot of that, came to questions around that downstream, but really, a lot of folks had said, they can collect the data, but interpreting it's, frankly speaking, they said it's the Wild West. So, and that was a common thread of questions around, we have these really rich data sets and information and phenomenal approaches in terms of mass spectrometry collection of the data. But there were questions still around, how do we annotate this information? How do we relate these modified proteins to a biological process in a large scale manner? The contrast is, in the field, folks often focused on very specific pathways as really where they honed in on, had very direct measurements of modifications and understanding of that kind of subset of molecular actors in a pathway.
Right.
But that large scale interpretation was one of the biggest gaps, was how do we do this effectively, consistently, and reliably? And so that's for what I focused on, was how to expand the set of information that we have to interpret from. And with that, see additional insights that otherwise would have been missed, and bring a functional understanding to biology and the disease at hand.
Yeah, makes sense. So framing the question was the first place to start, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
always
yeah.
framing where we want to go, and then building out how do we get there.
Yes, yes. And you were, it sounds like you were probably in a pretty good place to leverage the newest technology that was becoming available if you were sat in MIT.
Yes, it
doing this
was. I mean,
research.
that's I can talk at nauseam to some extent of the phenomenal people, right, that are there, and that being a huge factor to it in the industry itself. And in Boston, I'd say the whole ecosystem was something that I've been really grateful to be a part of, and to have been supported by since early on in my PhD. As everything that we do in science, it's a village that brings things forward, right? It's a
Yes.
lot of really, really dedicated people working together to solve difficult problems. The community was a huge part of that, and still is today.
No, absolutely. From an entrepreneurial point of view, it sounds like this idea of starting a company, although perhaps as you said, you didn't know what it was, seeded itself quite early, or sort of raised its head quite early on. So my first question on that is where do you think that desire to do that came from? Was it just about the impact, or had you had this thought previously, or where did that sort of thought, I'm going to start a company one day, come from, do you think?
Yeah. For me, it definitely came from the impact side. I mean, kind of, we go really far back. As a child, I initially wanted to be an astronaut, because I was like, oh, that's really exciting. It's this exploratory nature. But I realized, okay, we have a lot of other things here on our planet that we need to fix first, was where I came from early on, of wanting to realize that I would rather focus my time and efforts to on our home and on the people here and the planet, and a lot of the questions and challenges that we still face here. And so very, very big picture perspective, but that was where the really impact factor started, was early on, of just wanting to help people and to see that impact in my lifetime.
Yes.
And starting a company was one direct avenue to that, and was a clear path, following kind of the trajectory of the technologies I'd worked on, to see, okay, this will support that very well, and will drive towards that impact facet very efficiently. And I enjoy the facet of being able to be a direct part of the decision making and the process of moving that forward.
Yeah.
And have loved it. So it really was an impact from the foundation of that decision. And
yeah, okay.
Wanting to help here on our planet Earth. So.
Yes, understand. And in terms of that company being Pepper, clearly you'd had these sort of speculative is probably even too strong a word. These conversations with John a few years prior to starting your PhD. Was there a point, and it may not have been just one thing, I appreciate, but was there a point at which you thought, oh, this could be the thing, actually? Do you remember that light bulb moment?
It was, to your point, it was multiple things that drove that. I mean, there was both the early validation that was seen in the results, and the experimental studies that followed up on the work that I did that showcase the success of that early technology. That was in parallel with also learning from what the industry was really hungry for. So learning the gaps of what is missing in drug discovery, and what people are wanting to have access to make more informed decisions, to bring successful programs forward for patients.
Yes.
And that really momentum kept growing from the technological side of it to the market side, the hunger for it, seeing what isn't in the space yet in terms of companies. So just the opening for a company like Pepper, and in many ways also just the inevitability that we've seen the progression over time of genomics to transcriptomics coming to play. Proteomics is just starting to come to be more common, but we're building information and data for decision making in the field.
Yes.
And it was this inevitable trend that transomics will become the common reality. It's a matter of who's going to successfully showcase that and bring that to bear, and Pepper is leading that charge to make that happen. So yeah, it's definitely been many things that have pushed that momentum forward, and we've seen that we can continue to date each of those facets from the technology side through to the hunger side with the partnerships that we've garnered at Pepper.
Yeah, and from a point of view of your career, I suppose there's a couple of options you can pursue at that point. You can let someone else do it and you build your academic career, or you can go and do it yourself. Was that ever a question for you, or was that something that you struggled with, or was it straightforward for you?
In all honesty, it was a question at times of which path to take. I think, I mean, being in an academic program and you're surrounded by other professors and faculty, that is something, there's a lot of examples, walking around the halls that you can talk to on that career path front. But for me, after discussing, the two options, I have been overwhelmingly excited and landed on the startup side, in part for just the role that I can and the influence I can bring to what we're building, seeing and making those decisions to bring this technology forward and to see the impact and the speed with which we can do that. And there are some similarities, right? In both cases, you're looking for funding, be it through a grant, be it through investors. You're still going out there looking for funding to grow a team. And I landed on the startup side, just given the speed and impact for bringing that to the market.
Yes.
And I wanted to move to bringing to patients, getting closer to that step, which, if staying in a research setting, it's earlier in that process, typically. Still application based, but more towards the basic science side, as opposed to seeing something through to the clinic and bringing that really all the way through to the end process. So it was a question, but for me and where I wanted to be impact wise was a clear choice.
Okay. And then so you make that transition. Clearly you reconnected with John around this, or perhaps ongoing conversations with him. And I suppose, there's a point at which, isn't there, that you make that jump, you make that step into, okay, we're doing this, we're starting the company, and let's start on this day, and here we go. Yeah. And clearly scientifically there's a continuation there, and there's a thread through the research. But I suppose, at some point you go from freedom as a researcher in terms of sort of making decisions around how you conduct your research, but within a fairly established structure, to this is our company, we can do what we want with it.
Build our own structure. Yeah. Exactly.
So tell us about, and this is going back a few years, I appreciate, but tell us a bit about those early days, those first steps that you took as Pepper, the sort of the things that happened that perhaps you didn't expect, or the memories that you have from that time.
Yeah. I mean, overarching, so we started, I just kind of, to give context to the timeline, we started operations in January 2020. And
interesting time to start a business.
It was an interesting time on this planet for all of us, but yes. It's something that for us with COVID and the like, what we ended up focusing on very early was the partnership portion of what we were building, as we saw a lot of opportunities of pharma looking, having shift in where they were spending to an extent, given the context of things, and had opportunities, and were able to network to meet people who saw the value and had the ability to work with us. And that was phenomenal on many fronts. One was just the early validation, both for what the industry was hungry for, even just data and results as a result of that partnership very early on. And that led very quickly into our pre-seed from that momentum, and really it's been growing ever since. So we've not only launched from stealth in late 2021, and right now have been fortunate to add on from that to up to a total of 4 partnerships, one of which is with the top 5 pharma. So we've seen that momentum grow as well, and I've loved it. It's been fantastic. don't know if that quite answered your early days question.
No, this is
But
interesting. And I
yeah.
think, these things sometimes go by in a bit of a blur as well. So it can be hard to
Yeah.
pinpoint. So if so if someone is on the cusp of making that same transition now. So
Mhm.
if they've got an idea, they've been developing it as a researcher, they've decided to move into a company,
Mhm.
what would you say has been your experience around the differences between the two um, environments, I suppose, or the
Mhm.
two types of work? Um, and then as a second part to that question, I'd be really interested in sort of what are the skills that you've had to develop to be effective as the CSO of a company versus as a researcher?
Yeah. So I guess in terms of what is different, I mean, I think as some of it is facets of what drives decision making to an extent,
Mm-hmm.
right? Before I even mentioned, our goal is towards the patient side, toward the insight side, as opposed to say publishing. And I think that's something that is publishing is weighted more heavily on the research side.
Of course, yeah.
Um, and some of the differences too, I would say, focus on the things that I've had to learn. So a little bit dovetailing into your second question there,
Mm,
as I mean, I had not gone out and done fundraising as a
right.
researcher, talking to investors. That was a new skill set and something that in that was something that I learned a lot from John on, as that was an experience that he had, and we've grown together in that, which has been
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. Um, Other facets being um, one, I would say, just thinking about how to drive questions. I think a lot of, for me, and this might mean part, I think, be a little bit of an artifact of going from straight from a PhD to founding a company, but it is a PhD. It's very focused on the question, but also the process is always at the front of how you
Right.
get something done and sharing that, and that's a huge focus. Now it is a huge part of the focus, but it's also our questions first time of what do we want? What is the impact we want? Where are we going? What is the key question that the pharma partner is looking to answer, and are we addressing that question? And how do we build towards that successfully? And that's
Mm-hmm.
been, I've loved that switch, frankly, because it shows um, the focus on impact and where we want to go. And I know I talk a lot about impact, but at the end of the day, that's really why we're here and why we're doing
Yeah,
it
of
and what
course.
gets us up every morning. So that facet and thinking through and framing that has been phenomenal. And I mean, there's a new set of stakeholders. I guess that's the other learning
Mm-hmm.
facet. I talked about investors. There's a different context when looking at, say, business development type question in addition to the science, right? There's always a strategy side that comes into play in a different way
Yeah,
for
of
a
course.
startup or a company than might be seen in a research setting. Um, and frankly, both contexts are important to moving the field forward. I've
Mm-hmm.
liked the strategic side and thinking about where this can take the company and where this can take our technology and insights for our own pipeline, and why we make those decisions to make that happen quickly.
Yes. Yes. Interesting. And in the first 3 years of any enterprise, there are challenges that you face, and everyone has slightly different ones. What do you think have been the key things that you guys have had to deal with, that you've come through, that have been the key challenges to building Pepper to where it is today?
Yeah. Um, I mean, one that I think has been top of mind, that also is a great example that we've come through is, I mean, somewhat, talked about the speed with which we want to move forward.
Mm.
Large pharma does not operate at that speed. They're a big organization. They're a bit slower. This is
Mm-hmm.
fairly well known in this space. And that part, I think, initially I hadn't appreciated as much, and I think that's something. And when we were looking to go out for partnerships, was and was establishing how we were going to build those partnerships, the validation that we
Yes.
needed to get there, and then how we were going to also reach the point of signing these larger contracts and deals. And that's something that we've been excited to now be crossing to that other side of. So um exemplified by both the traction we've had with partners, as well as some of the other programs that we've been fortunate to be a part of as well. So Merck, actually, we've recently joined an accelerator with Merck, MDSS, the Merck Digital Sciences Studio,
Right.
which has been a fantastic resource, one to learn more about pharma, how they make decisions, how to work within that process and infrastructure, and what they look for and what they need. It's been a great resource supported by not only Merck, but also places like North Pond, McKesson, and Microsoft as well. And so really seeing and overcoming those early challenges of speed to the point with pharma of seeing how we work within that system,
right,
and now understand and can have signed contracts with, been a part of accelerators with, and have been thrilled to to see that growth for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so programs like this are really powerful for gaining, I guess, gaining insight that you just wouldn't be able to gain otherwise, because
100%.
your potential customers are kind of giving the game away, right?
Yeah.
Which, they're maybe not going to do in the middle of a negotiation. But you also mentioned earlier in the conversation that mentors have been really important to you throughout your career. I was interested as well in, and this may be part of the answer, but the skills you've talked about having to learn and the things you've had to develop, have there been things that have been particularly useful for you, resources or sort of approaches or things that you've done that have been really particularly key in your development?
I mean, overall, I would say the biggest resources have been the people that I've gotten to know over time, from mentors in graduate school. I mentioned Doug Laufenberger, Kevin Haggis, and the folks that I had worked with while at MIT in graduate school, are phenomenal resource to be able to send over an email when there's a question and seek feedback. And I think that's one thing I now mention a lot to folks in general is networking, getting to know people is one of the best ways that I've found to grow. Right. In part because when you have a question, it's very easy and a very low barrier to seek feedback and advice. Other kind of resources extending beyond that, within the Boston area have included Mass Bio, and they have a program, Mass Connect, which is essentially a mentorship program for startups that are growing, to have a panel of, I think it was about 8 to 12 people within the industry from different sectors. So this could be from marketing, from pharma, from legal. So a lot of different perspectives all around the table. And it's a multi-week program of going through, sharing what we're building, getting questions week to week, feedback. And that in of itself was a excellent resource to get to know other people in the industry locally. And we're still in touch with many of those folks to date.
Yeah, interesting. And I know there are programs similar to that, perhaps not on the same scale, but similar to that in lots of different hubs.
Absolutely, I'm certain there are. And I guess the last bit I'd round out is kind of from those experiences and those connections is also where we've built Pepper's advisory board as well. Right. So that's something that stuck with us as we grow the company for sure. And partnerships. We're working with a faculty at Stanford, Dean Felsher's lab, for part of our internal pipeline. And that's, again, a phenomenal resource. And his team has been superb to work with, and their expertise within oncology and MYC-driven cancers. As part of our broader team, we're honored to be a part of. So.
No, absolutely. Now, you mentioned a word during that, Samantha, that strikes fear into the heart of many people. You mentioned networking.
My younger self looks back and goes, "Oh, that is important." No,
yeah.
But yeah.
So, is this something that came naturally to you, or have you had to sort of push yourself into embracing it?
I would say it was an evolution. I wouldn't say it was. Yeah. So it's something that it takes tenacity to go out and to just meet someone new, say who you are, what you're building, and part of what I've found is the best way to do it is just to jump in. And I've definitely seen a progression over time, thinking back to starting out, and but the huge reward is the people you end up getting to know. And it's been interesting even just to see the transition of now going to conferences, right? The focus is on meeting people and on getting to see, you have all these phenomenal people in one spot for a few days of just getting to talk with them, to ask questions. and keep those connections and nurture them over time, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think just throwing yourself in is crucial, and I guess there is a skill in presenting things in a way that, when I say presenting, I don't necessarily mean a presentation, but
right, but sharing,
presenting
talking,
things in a way that engages those people and sort of talks to the things that they're interested in. But as well, I suppose I think people understand how difficult it can be and reciprocate. And I think as well, if you can show them in their terms what the impact of what you're doing is, it's amazing how generous people will be with their help and support and introductions and all that kind of thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. And a lot of people, I mean, especially, you know, on the scope of industry veterans to folks that are both, you know, very early on and starting, the whole spectrum, if, you know, once you garner that enthusiasm, people want to see other people succeed. They want to see the technology work. They want to collectively be a part of bringing a solution to a very difficult area and helping people. So I think that's, I mean, I've seen that across the board, and it's exactly, they've, like you noted, they've been there too, and those that kind of experience and know what it's like and are excited to help and support.
Yeah. And I think as well, you know, particularly in the scientific community, I'm sure you've seen this as well. It doesn't matter how successful or experienced scientists become, they still get excited about cool stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's great. I love it.
So you've probably touched on some of these things already, but if you were starting this journey again, or if you were talking to someone who was, and you know, after you'd obviously said to them, "Are you sure? Are you sure? You're sure? Are you 100% sure this is what you want to do?" What are the key things that you'd give them as advice? Well, you know, and again, you may have touched on some of these things already. What would you share with that person?
Yeah. Well, I guess first, I would note, I don't think I'd have an over reassuring, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" I think if someone's excited about it and they want to give it a try, it's a community that supports that. So I think in many ways, I would, if someone's enthusiastic about it, I would take the plunge, find a resource of people around you to support that. Gonna, I guess, go back to my networking comment, but that actually of people to answer questions and resources to draw from is the biggest piece of support I can mention in that, because I mean, especially starting out, you know, we were two people, right, in January 2020, and we found a, you know, resource of mentors, a resource of other I mean, folks as well, such as legal and the like, right? There are, you know, foundational things that you're supported by.
Yes.
And that's critical. And I would say to outline those, know what your strengths are, know where your strengths are not, and find resources, mentors, services to fill in those gaps. I think that's the other big thing that I've learned a lot around, is to not expect myself to do everything, right? I think in a PhD, you're learning a lot, right? And you're expanding into a deep technical area, which is fantastic. But now it's a matter of, okay, we have a lot to do, and we have, like, we're not experts in everything. And so it's acknowledging what problems we're going to solve, and then effectively reaching out to individuals to support that. And I think that's something else for fundraising that investors do like transparency on, right? Of what your resources are, how you're building that, what team you want to bring in.
Yes.
We recently, for example, brought in a chief development officer who's been a phenomenal team member to build out our pipeline. He has an expertise in pharma that, you know, is something that in building up pipelines, neither John nor I had done. So we brought in someone who had seen that, who'd seen successes, and are thrilled to have him on board as part of our team.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And there's some amazing people out there that you can leverage as well. So going back to Pepper, or continuing to talk about Pepper, we are recording this a couple of months into 2023.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what's next. What does this year hold? What's the plan from here?
Yes. So this is the year that we're bringing forward and expanding upon our own pipeline. So that's first and foremost within oncology, which has been really exciting for us as a drug development company. Second facet is the partnerships that we're working on. So I'd mentioned that to date we'd closed 4. We currently have 3 that are active. that we're building towards. So results and insights from that as well.
Yes.
And further building out the platform in support of both of those. So it's really exciting year, lots going on, and are thrilled to keep in touch about what happens next.
No, absolutely. Well, exciting times, as you say, and I'm sure it's going to be a busy year for you. So best of luck.
As it should be, though.
Of course, yes.
Yes.
If it's not busy, that's when you need to worry,
right? Yes.
Best of luck with it, Samantha. Thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Been a pleasure. And I guess I'd build on two facets, just kind of in closing of thinking about the year ahead. We are currently actively raising our seed fundraise. So that is something that we're seeking introductions for. So folks are interested, always feel free to reach out. And I guess the last facet just goes back to that inevitability aspect of transomics, and thrill of leading the charge to bring transomics forward to treat the untreatable.
Fantastic. Well, we will keep an eye on it with very great interest.
Splendid. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thanks very much for listening. Careers in Discovery is sponsored by Singular, helping you to build a brilliant biotech company. Biotech leaders spend far too much time, money, and energy on hiring and people issues. Head to www.singular-biotech.com to learn how you can recruit and engage your team more effectively so you can focus on developing medicines, treating patients, and saving lives.